The prestige was finally mine. The heavy, gold-embossed envelope sitting on my desk felt like it weighed 10 pounds. Inside was the formal confirmation of my appointment as the Chief Operations Officer for the firm. It was the culmination of 15 years of late nights, missed weekends, and a relentless pursuit of excellence that had nearly cost me my sanity. I stood in my office, the scent of expensive sandalwood and fresh ink clinging to the air, feeling a sense of triumph that was supposed to be shared. But when I walked into our open, concept living room to tell Julian, the air didn't sparkle with celebration. There was no pop of a cork, no warm embrace, no pride reflected in his eyes. Instead, my husband of nearly a decade sat at our reclaimed oak table, surrounded by stacks of bank statements and a glowing laptop screen. He didn't look up. He didn't even acknowledge the bottle of vintage champagne I had set on the counter. "I heard the news from Marcus," Julian said, his voice flat, devoid of any inflection. "See, sweet, quite the climb. I thought we could go out tonight, Julian." "This is a huge milestone for us," I said, trying to bridge the sudden, icy distance in the room. He finally looked up, but his gaze wasn't affectionate. It was clinical. It was the look of a man calculating a risk. "For you, Diana, it's a milestone for you. And frankly, it's a wake-up call for me. Since you're officially a high flyer now, I think we need to rethink the way this household functions. The what's mine is yours philosophy was fine when we were struggling kids, but you're in the big leagues now. It's time we stop pretending our finances are a communal pool." I froze, the champagne bottle suddenly feeling very cold in my hand. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want total financial autonomy. Effective immediately," he said, sliding a typed document across the table. "Separate accounts, separate investments. We split the mortgage, the insurance, the groceries, and the utilities 50-50 down to the cent. No more relying on my stability to pad your lifestyle. From now on, you stand on your own 2 feet." The irony was so sharp it almost drew blood. For 7 years, Julian's stability was a ghost story he told himself to sleep at night. I was the one who had kept us afloat while his boutique architectural firm bled money. I was the one who paid for his luxury SUV because he needed to look the part for clients he never seemed to sign. I was the one who funded his mother's specialized nursing care when her pension ran dry. Julian was a man built out of my sacrifices, yet here he was, treating my success as an act of war. He saw my promotion not as a victory for our family, but as a threat to his ego. He wanted to make sure that even if I sat in the biggest office in the city, I wouldn't have access to a single dime of what he considered his money, despite the fact that he was only in a position to have any money because I had cleared his path for a decade. I looked at the document. It was a formal, financial separation agreement. He had even had it notarized. "You want this?" I asked, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous calm. "You want to be completely separate? It's the only way to keep things fair." He smirked, leaning back in his chair with a newfound arrogance. He thought he was asserting dominance. He thought he was putting me in my place, ensuring I knew that my wealth would never touch his. "Fine," I said, picking up a pen from the table. "Let's make it official." I signed the paper without a second of hesitation. I saw the flash of surprise in his eyes. He expected a fight, a tearful plea for unity. He didn't realize that the moment my pen touched that paper, I wasn't just signing a financial agreement. I was signing the death warrant of our marriage, and I was doing it with surgical precision. To understand the coldness that settled into my bones that night, you have to understand the history Julian chose to forget. When we first married, he was the visionary. He had the sketches, the big ideas, the disruptive concepts for modern living. I was the one with the business degree and the steady paycheck. When his first firm folded, I took out a second mortgage to keep him from declaring bankruptcy. When his second venture stalled, I used my entire year and bonus to pay off his predatory business loans. I had been his silent partner, his banker, and his safety net. But Julian had a remarkable ability to rewrite the past. In his mind, his current modest success was entirely self-made. He resented every promotion I earned, because each step I took up the corporate ladder reminded him of the ladder I had built for him. The new era of the Julian and Diana split began that following Monday. I watched him with a detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a specimen in a jar. Suddenly, Julian was a different man. He began spending money with a reckless abandon that defied logic. Within 2 weeks, the 15,000 limited edition watch appeared on his wrist. A month later, his SUV was gone, replaced by a custom-built Italian sports car with a monthly lease payment that would have covered a small apartment's rent. He started talking about private equity and offshore diversification at dinner parties, acting as though separating our accounts had magically unlocked a hidden vault of gold that I had somehow been suppressing. I stayed quiet. I didn't ask where the money was coming from. I didn't comment on the $2,000 strips or the frequent business trips to high-end resorts. Instead, I did what I do best. I looked at the data. I knew Julian's firm's books better than he did. I knew his billables, his overhead, and his dwindling client list. There was no version of reality where he could afford this lifestyle. I suspected he was racking up credit card debt to spite me, but Julian was too cowardly for that kind of risk. He was getting the money from somewhere else. I hired a woman named Elena, a forensic accountant who operated in the shadows of high-stakes divorces. She was a bloodhound in a designer blazer. I gave her our old joint records, his firm's public filings, and a mandate find the source. 3 weeks later, Elena called me at 11:00 p.m. Her voice was taut with a mixture of professional fascination and personal disgust. "Your husband isn't just playing a shell game, Diana," she said. "He's committed a felony, a very specific, very ugly felony." "Tell me," I said, sitting in the dark of my new office, looking out at the city lights. "He has power of attorney over his mother's estate, right?" Elena asked. "Beatrice's trust fund." "Yes, he's the sole trustee. It was set up by his late father to cover her medical bills and her 24-hour care for her cognitive decline." "Why?" "Because over the last 90 days, Julian has siphoned exactly $142,000 out of that trust," Elena said. "He's been labeling the withdrawals as specialized medical equipment and unforeseen facility upgrades, but the money is going directly into a private account he opened the day after you signed that separation agreement. He's using his mother's end of life security to buy watches and car leases. He's literally stealing the air from her lungs to look richer than you." A wave of nausea hit me, followed by a searing, white-hot rage. I liked Beatrice. She was a gentle, dignified woman who had always treated me like a daughter. To see her own son treat her like an ATM, especially while she was too frail to understand, was a level of depravity I hadn't expected, even from Julian. "There's more," Elena continued. "He's also stopped paying the property taxes on your primary residence. He's been taking the money you've been giving him for your 15% share and moving it into a separate escrow. He's building a getaway fund. He's planning to leave you, Diana. He's just waiting until he's liquid enough to make a grand exit. He's waiting for a stage," I whispered. "Well, I'll give him one." I didn't confront him that night. I didn't scream or throw his 15,000 watch out the window. I played the long game. For the next 2 months, I became the struggling executive. I complained about the high cost of my new, separate lifestyle. I made a show of clipping coupons and canceled our high-end meal delivery service, claiming I needed to tighten my belt to meet my half of our expenses. Julian loved it. He would sit across from me at dinner, cutting into a dry, aged ribeye while I ate a simple salad, and lecture me on the virtues of fiscal responsibility. "It's tough when you don't have a partner to lean on, isn't it?" he'd say, his voice thick with condescension. "But this is good for you, Diana. It builds character. You were getting soft, relying on the communal pool. Now you see the value of $1. You're right, Julian," I'd say, looking down at my plate so he wouldn't see the fire in my eyes. "I'm learning so much about what people are truly capable of. The perfect opportunity arrived in the form of Beatrice's 80th birthday. It was meant to be a landmark event. Julian had insisted on hosting it at a prestigious country club, inviting the entire extended family, old family friends, and even a few of Beatrice's former colleagues from her days as a university dean. He wanted it to be a showcase of his success. He was going to give a speech, present her with a special gift, and solidify his image as the devoted, wealthy son. The night before the party, Julian was pacing the living room, practicing his toast. "I'm going to announce that I'm taking over the full costs of her care," he bragged. "I'll tell the family that my portfolio has performed so well that I'm moving her to that private estate in the Hamptons. It'll look incredible." "That's a very bold move, Julian," I said, tucking a heavy leather folder into my briefcase. "I'm sure everyone will be floored by your generosity." The gala was a sea of black ties and silk gowns. The ballroom was draped in white orchids, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Beatrice sat in a place of honor at the head of the long table, looking frail but elegant in a Chanel suit I had bought for her years ago. Julian was in his element, holding court, his new watch gleaming under the crystal chandeliers. The moment for the toast arrived. Julian stood up, glass raised, a look of practiced humility on his face. "Family, friends, and most importantly, Mother," he began, his voice projecting with theatrical warmth. "They say a man's worth is measured by how he cares for those who raised him. This past year has been one of immense growth for me, both professionally and personally. And because of that success, I've decided to make a major change. I am officially moving Mother to the Beaumont estate next month, where she will have the absolute best care money can buy. It's the least I can do for the woman who gave me everything." The room erupted in applause. Beatrice smiled, a tear rolling down her cheek, though she looked confused. Julian beamed, soaking in the adulation like a sponge. I stood up slowly. The applause died down as people noticed the movement. "Julian, that is a beautiful sentiment," I said, my voice clear and carrying to every corner of the room. "And you're right. Accountability and family are everything. And since you've been so insistent on transparency and separate accounts lately, I thought I'd help you share the full extent of your success with everyone here." Julian's smile faltered just a fraction. "Deanna, this isn't the time. Sit down." "Oh, I think it's the perfect time," I said, opening the leather folder. "I've prepared a special anniversary report for the family. You see, Julian has been very busy managing Beatrice's affairs. So busy, in fact, that I thought we should all see the innovative ways he's been funding this new lifestyle of his." I handed the first copy to Beatrice's brother, a retired high court judge. I handed the second to the head of the trust's oversight committee, who was also in attendance. "What is this?" the judge, his brow furrowing as he looked at the first page. "It's a comprehensive forensic audit," I said. "It details the $142,000 Julian has borrowed from his mother's medical trust over the last 90 days. It cross-references the dates of his new sports car lease with the dates he claimed Beatrice needed a specialized cardiovascular monitor that was never actually purchased. It also shows the $30,000 he funneled into a private escrow account for a condo in the city, money that was supposed to pay for his mother's property taxes, which are now 3 months in arrears." The silence that hit the room was deafening. It was the sound of a vacuum, a total collapse of the atmosphere. Julian's face went from pale to a sickly, mottled gray. "You're insane. You're making this up because you're jealous of my independence." "I'm not making up the bank transfers, Julian," I said, pointing to the documents, "or the fact that you used the trust's IP address to authorize the car lease payment while you were sitting in your office. I'm not making up the fact that your firm hasn't billed a client in 6 weeks. You didn't separate our accounts to be independent. You separated them so you could steal from your dying mother without me seeing the trail." Beatrice's brother stood up, his face a mask of thunder. He looked at the audit, then at Julian. "Is this true? Did you take the money for her heart medication and put it into a car? Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked around the room, searching for an ally, but all he found were faces full of horror and disgust. Beatrice, sensing the shift, looked at Julian's wrist. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the 15 Zalozan watch. "Julian," she whispered, "is this my house? Is this my medicine?" It was the breaking point. The judge, a man who had spent 40 years dealing with criminals, didn't wait for an explanation. He called the police right there in the ballroom. The downfall was spectacular. Because Julian had insisted on that legally binding financial separation agreement, he had effectively stripped himself of any claim to my resources. When the lawsuits from the trust began, he had no way to pay for a high-powered defense. When the criminal charges for embezzlement and elder abuse were filed, he couldn't use our joint assets for bail because there were no joint assets. He tried to sue me for defamation, but my lawyers, the best money can buy, simply produced the forensic audit and a dozen witnesses from the gala. The case was dismissed before it even reached a courtroom. Julian lost everything. His firm was shuttered. His sports car was repossessed. His designer suits were sold at a consignment shop to pay back a fraction of what he owed his mother's estate. He ended up in a tiny, cramped apartment on the edge of the city, working as a junior draftsman for a firm run by one of the people he had sneered at years ago. I handled the divorce with the same clinical efficiency. I used to manage a corporate merger. I made sure he got exactly what was his, which was nothing. A year later, I was sitting in my new office, the one with the view of the entire skyline. My life was quiet, organized, and infinitely more peaceful. I still saw Beatrice. I had taken over the management of her care, using my own salary to ensure she lived out her days in the comfort she deserved. She didn't remember the gala much, but she knew I was there, and that was enough. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. "Deanna." The voice was thin, reedy, and full of a bitterness that time hadn't softened. "Julian," I said, not even bothering to sound surprised. "You won." He spat. "Are you happy? I'm living in a basement. I'm taking the bus to work. My own family won't speak to me. You destroyed my life over a few bank transfers." "I didn't destroy your life, Julian," I said, looking out at the sun setting over the river. "You destroyed it the moment you decided that your ego was more important than your mother's life. I just gave you the separate life you asked for. I separated my future from your greed, my success from your parasitic nature, and my reality from your lies. You could have helped me," he whispered. "You had the money." "I did have the money," I agreed. "And I'm spending it on the people who actually deserve it. Goodbye, Julian." I hung up and felt a profound sense of lightness. The lesson was finally over. Julian had wanted to teach me about the value of $1, but in the end, I was the one who taught him the value of a person. And as I walked out of my office and into the vibrant, evening air of the city, I knew that my account was finally perfectly balanced. The transition from a life entangled with Julian to a life of true independence was more than just a change in bank balances. It was a psychological rebirth. For months, I found myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for a snide comment about my spending, or a lecture on why my success was a fluke. But the silence that replaced him was a gift. I began to realize how much space he had occupied, not just in our home, but in my mind. Every decision I had made for a decade had been filtered through the lens of, how will this affect Julian's ego? Now, that lens was shattered. I bought the furniture I liked. I took the vacations I wanted. I invested in companies that meant something to me. But the most satisfying part of my new life was my relationship with Beatrice. Without Julian there to gatekeep her care or manipulate her finances, she thrived as much as her condition allowed. I moved her into a high-end facility that felt more like a boutique hotel than a nursing home. I visited her every Sunday, and we would sit in the garden and talk about the books she used to teach when she was a dean. One Sunday, about 18 months after the divorce, She looked at me with a sudden, piercing clarity that sometimes comes to people in the later stages of cognitive decline. "You saved me, didn't you, Diana?" she asked, her hand resting on mine. I didn't want to burden her with the sordid details of her son's betrayal. "We all look out for each other, Beatrice." "No," she said, her voice firm. "He was always a small man. My son. He had a hunger in him that couldn't be filled. He would have eaten us both alive eventually. I'm glad you got away." It was the closure I didn't know I needed. Even his own mother had seen the truth. As for Julian, his descent continued. The junior drafting job didn't last. His arrogance made him impossible to manage. He bounced from firm to firm, his reputation following him like a dark cloud. In the age of Google and LinkedIn, you can't hide a public scandal involving elder abuse and embezzlement from a major trust. He was a pariah in the architectural community. The last I heard, he was trying to sell consulting services online, a desperate attempt to recapture the visionary persona he had so carefully crafted. He was a ghost of a man, haunted by the memory of a life he had traded for a car lease and a watch. My own career continued to soar. I was named one of the most influential women in the industry, and my firm saw record-breaking growth under my leadership. But the accolades felt different now. They weren't weapons to be used in a domestic war. They were simply reflections of my hard work. I eventually met someone else, a man who had his own success, his own life, and an ego that didn't need to be propped up by my diminishment. When we decided to move in together, we had a conversation about finances. "I'm a fan of transparency," he said, sitting across from me at a small bistro. "But I'm also a fan of partnership. Let's keep our own accounts for our personal passions, but let's build something together for our future. No walls, Diana. Just a shared foundation." I looked at him and felt a flicker of the trust I thought I had lost forever. "I'd like that," I said. The separate accounts agreement stayed in a safe in my office, a relic of a past life. I kept it not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. It was the document that had freed me. It was the proof that sometimes the thing that is meant to hurt you is the very thing that saves you. Julian thought he was teaching me a lesson about independence. He was right, but not in the way he intended. He taught me that independence isn't about having your own bank account. It's about having the courage to walk away from anyone who asks you to be less than you are. The sun set on the city, and I stood on the balcony of my new home, looking out at the endless possibilities of the night. My life was mine. My success was mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to apologize for any of it. The end of the story wasn't the gala, and it wasn't the divorce. The end was the moment I realized that I was enough, exactly as I was, without having to carry the weight of a man who only wanted to bring me down. I was the architect of my own life now, and the structure was finally, beautifully sound. I spent the next few years focusing on a different kind of wealth, the kind you can't see on a balance sheet. I started a foundation in Beatrice's name, dedicated to providing legal and financial protection for the elderly. We worked to pass legislation that made it harder for trustees to abuse their power, creating a system of checks and balances that would prevent other Julians from siphoning away the dignity of their parents. It was my way of turning a personal tragedy into a public good. Every time we stopped a fraudulent transfer or helped a senior regain control of their assets, I felt a piece of the old anger dissipate. I was no longer the victim of a greedy husband. I was the champion of people who had no one else to fight for them. One day, I was invited to speak at a conference on corporate ethics. After my presentation, a young woman approached me, looking hesitant but determined. "Ms. Sterling," she asked. "It's Vance now," I corrected with a smile. "But yes." "I read your story," she said, her voice low, "about the separate accounts and the audit. My husband just asked me for the same thing. He says he wants us to be financially independent. Now that I've started my own business, I was afraid it meant he didn't love me anymore." I looked at her, seeing the same shadow of doubt I had carried. It might mean that, I said gently, but it also might be the greatest gift he ever gives you. If he wants to stand on his own, let him. But make sure you are standing on something solid, too. Don't be afraid of the separation. Be afraid of the lies that require it. She nodded, a look of resolve settling on her face. Thank you. As she walked away, I realized that my story had become a roadmap for others. It wasn't just about a marriage that failed. It was about the importance of self-worth and the power of truth. Julian eventually reached out one last time. It wasn't a phone call this time, but a long, rambling email sent from a generic address. He wasn't angry anymore. He was pathetic. He talked about missed opportunities and misunderstandings. He even had the audacity to ask for a loan to jumpstart a new project. I know we had our issues, he wrote, but we were a team once. You know what I'm capable of. Just a small investment would get me back on my feet. I didn't even finish reading it. I didn't feel the need to reply or to point out the hypocrisy of his request. I simply hit the delete button. He was a ghost, a flickering image from a movie I had seen a long time ago. I moved forward, always forward. I traveled, I learned, and I loved. I built a life that was so large and so vibrant that the memory of the cold dining table and the typed separation agreement felt like it belonged to a different person. But sometimes, when I'm signing a major contract or looking over the foundation's impact reports, I'll catch a glimpse of my signature. It's firm, clear, and unapologetic, and I'll remember the night I signed that paper for Julian. I'll remember the chilling clarity that came with it. And I'll smile, because that was the night I finally learned the most important financial lesson of all. You can't put a price on your peace of mind. The world kept spinning, and the seasons changed. Beatrice passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 years after the gala. At her funeral, the room was filled with the people whose lives she had touched. Her students, her colleagues, and the family members who had stood by us during the scandal. Julian wasn't there. He had been legally barred from the estate, and no one invited him. I stood by her grave, holding a single white orchid. I whispered a final thank you to the woman who had inadvertently shown me the truth about the man I had married. She had given me a family when I had none, and in the end, I had given her the protection she deserved. As I walked away from the cemetery, I felt a sense of completion. The chapter was truly closed. The accounts were settled. I spent that evening on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker into life. I was no longer the COO. I had moved on to be the CEO of my own investment firm, one that specialized in ethical startups and social impact ventures. My life was full, my heart was open, and my conscience was clear. I had learned that the big leagues weren't about titles or salaries or luxury watches. The big leagues were about character. They were about the strength to do what's right, even when it's hard. They were about the courage to stand alone, if it meant standing in the truth. I picked up a glass of water, the cool liquid refreshing in the night air. I didn't need the champagne to celebrate anymore. Every day was a celebration of the life I had built, the person I had become, and the freedom I had earned. The journey from that mahogany table to this balcony had been long and painful, but I wouldn't change a single step of it, because every step had led me here, to this moment, to this peace. I was Diana Vance. I was independent, I was successful, and I was finally truly free. As the years rolled on, the legacy of my decision continued to ripple outward in ways I could never have anticipated. The Beatrice Act, as the legislation we lobbied for came to be known, was adopted in 3 neighboring states. It became a benchmark for elder protection, and I was often asked to consult with lawmakers on how to further strengthen financial safeguards for vulnerable populations. My firm, Vance Impact, grew into a global player. We didn't just invest in businesses, we invested in people. We looked for founders who had faced adversity and come out stronger. We looked for companies that had a soul, and every time we saw a leader choose integrity over a quick profit, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. I was helping to build the world that Julian had tried to convince me didn't exist. My personal life was equally fulfilling. The man I had met, David, became my partner in every sense of the word. We never had to worry about mine and yours, because we both understood that ours was much more powerful. We shared our successes, our failures, and our dreams, and when we eventually married, we didn't need a notarized agreement to tell us how to be a team. We already knew. But I never forgot the lesson. I kept a small, framed photo of Beatrice on my desk, a reminder of why I did what I did. And in the back of my mind, I always remembered the weight of that gold embossed envelope and the coldness of Julian's smirk. It kept me sharp. It kept me honest. And it kept me grateful. One winter evening, as the first snow began to fall over the city, I received a small package in the mail. There was no return address, just a postmark from a town upstate. I opened it and found a small, rusted key and a note written in shaky, barely legible handwriting. I found this in a box of my mother's old things. It's to the jewelry box her grandmother gave her, the one you always liked. I don't want it. I don't want anything that reminds me of that life. You were right, Diana. You always were, Jay. I looked at the key, feeling a strange mix of pity and relief. Julian was finally letting go, or maybe he was just tired of carrying the weight of his own resentment. Either way, it was the final piece of the puzzle. I took the key to the Beaumont estate, where Beatrice's belongings were stored. I found the old jewelry box, a beautiful piece of inlaid mahogany that had seen better days. I turned the key in the lock, and it opened with a soft click. Inside weren't diamonds or gold. There were letters, hundreds of them. Letters from Beatrice's husband, from her students, and from me. There were photos of us at the agency, of Julian when he was a boy, and of the day we got married. At the very bottom, I found a small, velvet-lined compartment. Inside was a simple gold band, Beatrice's original wedding ring, and next to it, a small slip of paper with a quote from a poem she used to love. Truth is the only thing that lasts. Everything else is just smoke and mirrors. I held the ring in my hand, feeling the coolness of the metal. Beatrice had known. She had known all along that the life Julian was building was made of smoke. And she had waited for someone to clear the air. I put the ring back in the box and locked it. I didn't need the jewelry, but I kept the letters. They were the real treasure. They were the proof that despite the greed and the lies, there was still a lot of love and truth in the world. I walked out of the estate and into the snowy night. The air was crisp and clean, and the city felt quiet and peaceful. I was going home to David, to a life built on a solid foundation, and to a future that was as bright as the freshly fallen snow. I had traveled a long road to get here. I had faced the darkness and come out into the light. I had learned that the most important accounts you ever keep aren't the ones in a bank, they're the ones in your heart. And my heart was finally perfectly in the black. The snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of the day. It was a blank slate, a fresh start. And as I drove through the quiet streets, I knew that the story of Diana Vance was no longer a story of revenge. It was a story of redemption. It was a story of how one woman's refusal to be diminished had changed the world around her. And that was a story worth telling. The next morning, I woke up to a world transformed by white. The city was muffled, peaceful, and stunningly beautiful. I sat in my kitchen, sipping a cup of hot coffee, and watched the snowplows begin their work. It was a reminder that even after a great storm, there is always a way to clear the path. David walked in, wrapped in a heavy robe, and kissed the top of my head. "It's beautiful out there," he said. "It is," I agreed. "It's perfect." "What are the plans for today?" he asked, sitting down across from me. "I think I'm going to go to the foundation," I said. "We have a new program starting, mentorship for young entrepreneurs. I want to be there for the first session." "You're always building something, Diana," he smiled. "I have to," I said, looking out at the skyline. "Because I know what happens when you don't have a solid foundation, and I want to make sure as many people as possible have one." He took my hand, and we sat in the quiet for a while, just enjoying the moment. There was no need for words. There was no need for notarized agreements. There was only the shared understanding of two people who respected each other, who loved each other, and who were building a life together, one day at a time. As the years turned into decades, the name Diana Vance became synonymous with integrity and resilience. My story was taught in business schools as a case study in ethical leadership, and my foundation helped thousands of people reclaim their lives and their dignity. Julian became a distant memory, a cautionary tale whispered in the corners of the industry. He never did get back on his feet. He spent the rest of his life chasing the ghost of the man he thought he was, never realizing that the man he could have been was right in front of him all along. But I didn't dwell on him. I had too much to do. I had a life to live, a world to change, and a love to cherish. In the end, the separate accounts hadn't just divided our money, they had divided our destinies. Julian had chosen a path of greed and isolation, while I had chosen a path of truth and connection. And the results spoke for themselves. I was Diana Vance. I was a survivor, a leader, and a partner. I was a woman who had found her own way, and in doing so, had helped others find theirs. And as I looked out at the city I loved, I knew that I had finally, truly, won the only game that mattered, the game of being a person of character in a world that too often rewards the opposite. The sun broke through the clouds, turning the snow-covered city into a glittering field of diamonds. It was a new day, and I was ready for it. I was ready for everything, because I knew who I was. I knew my worth, and I knew that as long as I stayed true to myself, there was nothing I couldn't handle. The journey was long, and it wasn't always easy. But it was mine, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Every few years, the anniversary of that gala would roll around. For a long time, it was a day of reflection, a day to remember the sharp sting of betrayal and the cold calculation of the audit. But as time went on, the day lost its power over me. It became just another day in a life full of them. One year on that day, I was in London for a conference. I was walking through a small park near the Thames when I saw an old man sitting on a bench, feeding the birds. He looked tired, worn out by a life that hadn't been kind to him. For a split second, I thought it was Julian. My heart skipped a beat, and the old adrenaline surged through me. But as I got closer, I realized it was someone else, just a stranger enjoying a quiet afternoon. I sat on a nearby bench and watched the river flow by. I realized then that the fear was gone. The shadow Julian had cast over my life had completely evaporated. He no longer had the power to make my heart race or my hands shake. He was nothing. I took a deep breath of the damp, London air and smiled. I felt a profound sense of gratitude for that moment of realization. I was truly, completely over it. I got up and continued my walk, the city of London bustling around me. I felt light, energized, and ready for the next adventure. I had a dinner to attend, a speech to give, and a whole world to explore. And I knew that no matter where I went or what I did, I would always carry the lessons of my past with me. They were the compass that guided me, the fuel that drove me, and the foundation that supported me. I was Diana Vance, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. The story of the separate accounts was a part of me, but it didn't define me. I was defined by the choices I made after the accounts were closed. I was defined by the way I treated people, the way I used my power, and the way I loved, and in that definition, I found my greatest success. The sun began to set over the Thames, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder of the endless beauty of the world. And as I watched the colors fade into the night, I felt a deep sense of peace. I was happy, I was free, and I was finally, truly, at home in my own life. The end of the story wasn't just about me. It was about all of us. It was about the power of truth to set us free, the importance of integrity to guide us, and the capacity of the human spirit to overcome even the deepest betrayals. It was a story about the long game, and I was glad I had played it. As I walked back to my hotel, the lights of the city began to twinkle in the darkness. They looked like a million tiny promises, all of them waiting to be kept. And I knew that I would keep mine. I would keep building. I would keep fighting for the truth. And I would keep loving with everything I had. Because that's what a person of character does. And I was finally, proudly, one of them. The end. Or perhaps just the beginning of a whole new story. A story where the accounts are always balanced, and the truth is the only currency that matters. A story where everyone stands on their own 2 feet, but no one has to stand alone. I looked at my own hands, steady and strong. I looked at the city around me, vibrant and alive, and I looked toward the future, full of hope and possibility. I was ready. I returned to New York a few days later, my heart full of new ideas and a renewed sense of purpose. David was waiting for me at the airport, and as soon as I saw his face, I knew I was home. "How was the trip?" he asked, taking my bag. "It was transformative," I said, and I meant it. We drove through the city, the familiar sights and sounds a comfort after the long flight. I looked at the buildings, the people, the endless energy of the place. It was my city, my life. "I was thinking," I said, as we crossed the bridge, "I want to expand the foundation. I want to start a program for women who are going through difficult divorces. Not just legal help, but financial and emotional support. A way to help them rebuild their lives on their own terms." David smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Diana. How can I help?" "Just be here," I said, leaning my head on his shoulder. "Just be you." And that was all I needed. The Foundation's new program was a huge success. We called it the Phoenix Initiative, and it helped hundreds of women find their strength and their independence. It was my most personal project yet, and every time I saw a woman walk out of our office with her head held high, I felt a piece of my own past being redeemed. My life was a testament to the fact that you can overcome anything if you have the courage to face the truth. I had turned a betrayal into a catalyst for change, and a separation into a new kind of unity. And as I stood on the stage at the launch of the initiative, looking out at the faces of the women we were helping, I knew that I had finally found my true calling. I was a builder of lives, and there was no more important work in the world. The sun set over the city, and the lights of the buildings began to glow. They looked like 1,000 tiny sparks of hope, all of them burning bright. And I knew that as long as we kept fighting for the truth, they would never go out. I was Diana Vance, and I was finally, truly at peace. The story of the separate accounts was a part of the past now, a closed chapter in a very long book, but the lessons it taught me would last a lifetime. They were the foundation of everything I had built, and the reason I was able to stand so tall. I looked at the women in the room, all of them on their own journeys, all of them finding their own strength, and I knew that they would be okay, because they weren't alone. They had each other, and they had the truth, and in the end, that was all they needed. The night air was cool and crisp as I left the launch event. I walked through the city, the sounds of the night a gentle hum in the background. I felt a sense of fulfillment that I had never known before. I was doing exactly what I was meant to do. I reached my apartment and went inside. David was in the kitchen making tea. He looked up and smiled as I walked in. "How did it go?" he asked. "It was perfect," I said. "It was exactly what it needed to be." We sat on the sofa together, the quiet of the night a comfort. We didn't need to talk. We just sat there, enjoying each other's presence and the knowledge that we had built something beautiful together. I looked out at the city, the lights of the buildings twinkling like stars. It was a beautiful sight, a reminder of the infinite possibilities of the world. And I knew that as long as we stayed true to ourselves, the future would be bright. I was Diana Vance. I was a survivor, a leader, and a partner. But most importantly, I was a person who knew the value of the truth, and I was finally, truly free. The end of the story wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had ever fought for their own dignity. It was about everyone who had ever refused to be diminished, and it was about everyone who had ever found the strength to walk away. It was a story for all of us, and I was proud to be the one to tell it. The city slept, but the truth remained. It was always there, waiting to be found. And once you found it, everything changed. I was proof of that. I closed my eyes and let the peace of the night wash over me. I was home. I was safe. And I was finally perfectly whole. The story of the separate accounts had come to an end, but the story of Diana Vance was just beginning, and it was going to be a beautiful one. I breathed in the quiet air and felt a deep sense of gratitude. For the journey, for the truth, and for the love that had sustained me. I was ready for whatever came next, because I knew that as long as I had the truth, I had everything. The night was long, but the dawn was coming, and I couldn't wait to see the light, the end.